Whenever you create a new class, each class should have at least one constructor. And of course, the constructor is a method that has the same name as the class. Before we build our constructor, we're going to create a couple of private variables. And private variables mean that only the class, only the methods within the class that contains the private variables, only those methods can access these variables. So we have two variables, length and width, and what this program that we're going to build is going to allow us to do is pretty much calculate the area of a rectangle. So, and we need length and width to do that. So now let's go ahead and create our constructor. So let's go ahead and create our constructor. All right, and we're going to give this constructor two parameters. It's going to pretty much pass the length and the width. And we're going to use this constructor to assign values to these private variables, because we know that only the methods within this class can access these variables. So if we're going to give it a value, it has to be within this class, because later on in the program class we're going to call or use this method, and the program class can't access these methods. The program class can, however, pass values, and it can pass values to this method, and this method can be used to assign values to these variables. So let's look at that in action. So now that we've created this constructor, and we know that whenever this class is called, the very first thing that's going to happen is that this constructor is going to be executed. So when a user enters two parameter values for these variables, we want to assign the value of these variables to these private variables. So we want to be able to say length, which is our private variable here, is the value of L, which is going to be whatever the user passed into this parameter. We also want to do the same thing for width. We will say width equals W, which is going to be the value that the user passed in. Of course, to calculate the area, we need to multiply the length times the width. So let's go ahead and create a public method. And by it being public, if we create, or when we create an instance of the rectangle class and our program class, we'll be able to access this method here, which we're going to call getArea. This will allow us to calculate the area. And notice what I'm doing with my braces here. I'm just going to delete this so you can kind of see that. Make sure you remember that Visual Studio 2015, it adds that second brace for you. So whenever you hit one brace, go ahead and just hit enter. You'll mess yourself up if you're constantly adding extra braces or things of that nature. So just make sure you're just aware that all I did here was, I hit enter. I hit that first curly brace one time, and then Visual Studio went ahead and actually added the second one for me. So then I just hit enter, and I'm right in between my two curly braces. It's very, very important that you're in between the curly braces, because this is what defines what the block of code is and what it contains. Okay, so when we get to getArea, all we really want to do is return a value. The value that we want to return is the product of the length and the width. So that means the length multiplied by the width. We want that returned whenever this method is called. Okay, so now let's go back to our program class, and let's create an instance of our rectangle class using these values and calculating the area. So in our main window here, we're going to create a couple of variables first, because we want to actually get the user's length and width so the user can calculate this up. So we're going to so the user can, when you run this program, you can calculate various the area of various rectangles, not just one. So we are going to create some double variables that will hold the user's length and width. So we'll say double user length, double, and this could actually go on the same line, user width. All right, they're both going to be double variables. And from there, we're going to actually ask the user to give us a length and a width. All right, so of course, you know, to ask the user a question, we need to say console.writeLine, please enter a width. Okay. Then, of course, when the user types something in, we want to assign whatever the user entered for the width. We want to put that into this double variable. Of course, because anything that's being typed into the console or into an input box or anything like that, it reads in as a string of text. So we need to make sure that we convert our user input prior to us trying to put it inside this variable. So now we've got our convert.toDouble set up, and now we can go ahead and put console.readLine, because whatever the user enters here will go inside our user width variable. Then next we want to ask the user to enter the length. So I like to use Lazy Programmer and copy and paste, because that line of code that I'm getting ready right now looks very similar to this one, with the exception that it's going to say length instead of width. So I'm just going to copy and paste, and then I'm going to enter length here. Of course, I'm going to do the same thing here. So I mean, you got to change a little the variable. It's totally up to you. I could have copied both of these lines at the same time. However, if you know, you feel uncomfortable with changing the variable names, you may just want to go ahead and write it out. Me, I'm being lazy, so I'm just going to change that variable, because I know that here, whatever the user enters, I want to go in the user length variable, and in here, whatever the user enters, I want to go inside the user width variable. So now I have my values that I can use to call my rectangle class, because we know that when we create an instance of the rectangle class, it only has one constructor, and that constructor requires you to pass 2 parameters. So whenever you create an instance of this rectangle, you must include 2 values to pass to this class. So looking at that in greater detail, let's first create an instance by using the name of the class, which is called rectangle. So you start typing rectangle, and that should pop up. And remember, rectangle is this class is the blueprint. It's not the actual object. So you have to still create an object, and you still have to instantiate it. So using this class, we're going to create a rectangle object. We're going to name that object rect. All right, that's going to be the object name or variable name that's going to be used in this rectangle class. Now, as a reminder, whenever you're creating an instance of an object of a class, if you do not instantiate it, then it's nothing more than just a variable name. And what I mean by instantiate, I mean actually connect this rectangle variable, this RECT variable that we just created, rect. You must actually connect it to the rectangle class. In order to do that, you need the keyword new. You need the name of the class, saying, hey, this is a new instance of the rectangle class. This is an example, an object made from the rectangle blueprint. So you have to say new rectangle, and then you need your parentheses. Now in the parentheses, when you in fact, before you get to the parentheses, so when you get to the rectangle class, once you put this parenthesis here, you can see IntelliSense for reminding you of the parameters that you must pass whenever you're calling or creating an instance of this object. It says double L and double W. You know those are your length and width values. So for the length, we already know here we have the user's length going in there. So we're going to say user length. Then the next parameter you need is the W for the width. We know we have that value stored in user width. So we're just going to say user width there. Now we've done what we needed to do to create an instance of this rectangle. But we also need to calculate or get the area. We can't do that without actually calling this method here. So when we get to our the next line of code, in order for us to get the area, we need to put, because it's going to return a value here. It's going to return a double value. Remember, we don't have the keyword void here, and void means it's not going to return a value. So if it does have a data type here, it needs to return a value of that data type. So when we go back to program.cs and we're looking at our code here, we know that if it's going to return a value, we need to put that value somewhere. So I'm actually going to create another variable. I'm just going to add it up to the top that says area. Okay. So then when we come here, We haven't used it. That's what that green squiggly line means, is you have a variable area is declared but never used, and that's okay because we're getting ready to use it. So then what we're going to do here is we're going to go ahead and say area equals get area. Oops, my bad, not get area. We need to use the rectangle. Area equals rect, because that's our object that we just created, dot get area. That allows us to call that variable or that method from our rectangle class, and then it's going to take what we have put inside that rectangle variable and it's going to multiply it and then return a value. So now that we have the value of the area placed in the area variable, now we need to go ahead and display that to the console. So we're going to have a console.writeLine, and then we're just going to say area of rectangle is, and then we're going to use a variable placeholder. Those variable placeholders pretty much allow you to set up the format of a string of text. So we're going to say area is, and so now we let our string of text know that we're going to have a variable that's going to go here, 1, because it only has a 0. If it had 1 and 2, then I would need to include not 1 and 2, but 0 and 1. Then that means that I'm going to have 2 variables here that are going to go there. But I'm only going to use 1, which is going to be the area. So once I have that here, it's let me know that after this comma, I need to make sure I put a variable here that's going to substitute, the information that goes here. It's going to replace that 0. So the variable that I want to use is the area variable. Then we're going to put our semicolon, and then of course we need our console.read key. Just so it's just really just reading a key of the keyboard, but it helps pause the program for us, so that way it doesn't immediately close out. So we're going to run the program. It's going to ask us to enter a width. We're going to say something, let's do something simple so that way we could easily calculate it in our head. Enter a length, I'm going to put 10. Area of rectangle is 150. And that concludes this video.